The Galactic Strategic Academy of Varix III was home to the finest military minds in the known universe. It had trained the future warlords, admirals, and tacticians of over 100 species, perfecting the art of warfare with precision and calculated strategy. For centuries, its training simulations had been designed to push cadets to their absolute limits, testing their intellect, discipline, and ability to predict enemy movements, which is why no one expected a single human to wreck everything. Tresh Valkar, a third-cycle cadet of the Threx Dominion, sat in his assigned pod, his neural interface calibrated for the upcoming simulated battle exercise. The rules were simple: 1-2 teams. One must defend, the other must infiltrate. 2. The defending team has full fortifications. 3. The attacking team has limited resources. The challenge had been carefully designed to teach restraint, patience, and the importance of precision. Tresh flexed his claws, analyzing the simulated terrain through his visor. His team had been assigned the defensive position, meaning victory was nearly guaranteed. A deep chuckle resonated in his throat. The attacking team had no chance. The instructors had seen to that. And then he noticed a new name in the team roster: Jonah Carter. Species. Human Tresh's mandibles clicked in irritation. "A human?" he muttered, scanning the cadets around him. Across the room, sitting far too casually in his pod, was the new recruit, a human with messy brown hair, a relaxed grin, and an utter lack of discipline. Tresh narrowed his eyes. Humans were still a relatively new addition to the galactic military scene. Sure, they had proven themselves in hand-to-hand combat and physical endurance trials, but when it came to strategic thinking, they were unpredictable, reckless, irrational. In other words, they were a liability. Tresh exhaled sharply. Fine. If the human was on the attacking team, then this would be over quickly. The simulation initialized, and then everything went horribly wrong. The defending team's fortress was a heavily shielded base at the top of a canyon. Only 2 entry points existed, each lined with auto turrets, energy barriers, and advanced motion sensors. No army had ever successfully breached it in under an hour. The attacking team's mission: infiltrate and capture the command center. It was a textbook scenario with only one correct solution: a careful, calculated approach. So naturally, the human ignored that completely. Tresh immediately realized something was wrong when the simulation's tracking grid showed Jonah Carter breaking off from his squad and sprinting straight toward the fortress. Not sneaking, not flanking, sprinting. Tresh's claw hovered over his command interface in confusion. "What is he doing?" Another cadet, a Zaltran strategist, hissed. "Is he malfunctioning?" The rest of the attacking team held back, likely unsure if the human had lost his mind. "Jonah?" He kept running, right toward the minefield. Boom! A detonation echoed across the canyon as the first mine exploded beneath Jonah's feet. Tresh exhaled in satisfaction. Idiotic mammal. But then, more explosions, one after another, in rapid succession. The minefield was detonating in a chain reaction, ripping through all of the defenses meant to slow down attackers. The cadets' heads snapped toward their command feeds in disbelief. Jonah hadn't triggered one mine by accident. He deliberately set them all off. The instructors paused the simulation in sheer confusion, and from across the room, Jonah Carter was laughing. "Man," he chuckled, stretching his arms, "your defenses suck." The instructors demanded an explanation. Jonah shrugged. "Your mines were designed to be avoided. That's a problem. If you expect enemies to go around obstacles, then you're assuming they'll play by your rules." He leaned back in his chair. "I just made sure your entire defense plan disappeared in 10 seconds. Silence. Tresh felt his scales crawl. Because for the first time in 3 years at the academy, he had no idea how to respond. Jonah Carter wasn't playing the game. He was breaking it. Tresh's claws tapped rapidly against his console as he scrambled to process what had just happened. The entire minefield. Gone. The carefully calculated defense strategy obliterated, and the human was grinning like this was a game. Tresh's mandibles clicked sharply as he turned to the instructors. "This is against regulations. The attacking team is required to advance with structured formation tactics. He just ran straight into the defenses and—" Jonah leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head. "Oh, sorry. I must have missed the part where the enemy was supposed to follow your rules." The other cadets shifted uneasily. Because he was right. There was no rule saying attackers had to move in a predictable manner. The Academy's entire system had been built on the assumption that students would follow standard tactics. Humans? They had other ideas. The simulation resumed. Tresh shook off his irritation. Fine. The minefield was gone, but that still left their fortress. The canyon had only 2 access points, each heavily defended with turrets, force fields, and energy barriers. No attacking force had ever breached them. And yet, Jonah was already moving again. Tresh scowled. What's he? He zoomed in on the tactical display, and his blood ran cold. The human wasn't heading toward either entry point. He was climbing the canyon wall. What is he doing?" one of the Zal Trin strategists hissed. Jonah wasn't even trying to be stealthy. He was scaling the rock face with nothing but his hands and boots, his body moving with absurd agility. "No one climbs the canyon," a cadet protested. "It's too steep." Another alien stammered. "Doesn't he realize the cliffs are unstable?" "The rocks could?" Jonah kicked off a ledge, grabbed an exposed metal pipe, and flipped himself higher. The watchtower guards turned their weapons toward him. Too late. Jonah launched himself off the rock face, tackled the nearest turret operator, and threw him over the ledge. A split second later, boom! The watchtower exploded. Tresh's claws dug into his console. How? The cadets around him stared at their displays, horrified. Jonah's entire squad was still waiting at the bottom of the canyon. He had breached the fortress alone. The defending team scrambled to contain the threat. A dozen soldiers rushed toward him. Jonah, still on the rooftop, casually picked up an enemy rifle, and then he tossed it off the ledge. Tresh's mandibles twitched in confusion. He just threw away his weapon? Then Jonah's voice crackled over the simulation comms. "Hey, I'm up here. You gonna make me fight all of you, or do I just win now?" Silence. The defensive squad hesitated. Because Jonah wasn't acting like a soldier, he was acting like a lunatic. Tresh clenched his jaw. This is psychological warfare. The alien cadets had studied hundreds of battle strategies, but they had never trained for an enemy who mocked them while actively dismantling their defenses. "Focus fire on the rooftop," Tresh snapped. "Take him down now." The squad opened fire. Jonah's response? He jumped off the building. Half the room gasped, but Jonah didn't fall. A cable shot out, hooking onto a metal beam below. He swung through the air like a grappling hook-wielding madman and landed inside an open storage bay. Then, boom! The entire building collapsed. Jonah walked out of the dust, grinning. Wow, these structures really aren't built to last, huh? The simulation instructors were speechless. Jonah had single-handedly destroyed an entire sector of the fortress. The attacking team hadn't even moved yet, and the alien cadets were too stunned to fight back. Because this wasn't strategy. This was chaos, and humans thrived in chaos. Tresh's claws scraped against his console as he stared in disbelief. The watchtower gone, the main structure compromised, the defensive squad scattered. And the worst part? The rest of the attacking team hadn't even moved yet. Jonah Carter, one human with no backup, no weapons, and no regard for common sense, had single-handedly broken the first half of the simulation. Tresh's mandibles clicked furiously. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't tactics. This was absolute madness. The simulation's lead instructor finally spoke through the comms, his voice tight with frustration. "Carter, Explain yourself." Jonah, now perched atop a fallen building, tapped his earpiece. "What? I'm just playing the game." The instructor's voice hissed with irritation. "This exercise is about tactical coordination, not— and what's more tactical than getting rid of half the enemy's defenses in under 5 minutes?" Silence. The alien cadets shifted uncomfortably. Because Jonah had a point, and everyone in the room knew it, the attacking team finally moved. With the minefield cleared and a literal hole in the enemy fortress, the rest of Jonah's squad pushed forward. Tresh clenched his jaw. Fine. The damage was done, but there was still a chance to salvage the situation. He activated emergency turrets along the inner courtyard, heavy gunners, auto-tracking cannons, suppression drones. If Jonah and his team tried to advance through the main entrance, they'd be torn apart. He smirked. "Let's see how he deals with that." Jonah's response: "All right, squad. Looks like they finally set up some real defenses. Let's break them." He didn't attack head-on. Instead, he gave orders. And that's when things got worse. The attacking team's Zenkai engineer, a 4-armed insectoid cadet, hesitated. What? That's not how this works." Jonah leaned against a wall. "Why not?" "Because those are their weapons," Jonah grinned. "Right. So let's make them ours." Before the defensive team even realized what was happening, the attackers didn't fight the turrets. They hacked them, reprogrammed them, and then turned them around. Tresh froze as his own auto-turret started gunning down his team. "What?" The simulation AI freaked out. Alert: unauthorized control override. Alert: defensive systems compromised. The other alien cadets panicked. "Why are our own guns shooting us?" "They can't do that. The system wasn't built for this," and standing at the center of it all, Jonah Carter, smiling like a man who just found out the rules don't apply to him. Tresh desperately adjusted his strategy. Fine. The turrets were lost, but the defensive drones were still operational. They were AI-controlled, hovering units designed to counter hacking attempts. Tresh activated the override command. All drones, purge unauthorized systems and target enemy forces." He smirked. Checkmate. Then he heard Jonah's voice crackle through the comms. "Oh, nice drones. I'll take those too." The attackers redirected their hacking efforts, and instead of disabling the drones, they reprogrammed them to follow Jonah. The battlefield AI didn't know how to handle it. The drones registered him as their commander, and just like that, the defending team lost control of their own aerial support. Tresh's entire defense strategy, turrets, drones, and suppression units, was now working for the enemy. His own team was under siege by their own weapons. And the attacking team? They were barely even fighting. "This isn't how warfare works," one of the instructors snapped. "Oh, I don't know," Jonah replied, watching from the safety of his stolen defenses. "Seems to be working just fine for me." The alien cadets were no longer focused. They were frustrated, angry, confused, because this wasn't a normal battle. This was a psychological disaster. "This makes no sense. He hasn't even fought us directly. This isn't strategy, it's chaos." And Jonah Carter thrived in chaos. Tresh was seething. Fine. The defensive grid was lost. The turrets and drones were lost. But they still had one last option. "We locked down the command center," he ordered. "Force them to come to us." If they held the inner stronghold, they could stall long enough for the simulation timer to run out. Jonah's voice came over the comms again. "Hey, Tresh, buddy, I got a question for you." Tresh's mandibles clicked furiously. "What?" Jonah grinned. "Did you ever think to check your backup power generators?" Tresh's stomach dropped. The power to the command center shut down. The lights flickered off. The reinforced doors unlocked. And in the darkness, one last notification popped up on Tresh's interface. "Command center systems overridden. Simulation ended. Attacking team wins." The simulation shut down. The alien cadets sat in stunned silence. Tresh's mandibles trembled in rage. "Jonah?" He stood up, stretched, and let out a satisfied sigh. "Whew, that was fun." The instructors had no words. Jonah had. Turned the battlefield against them, hacked their defenses instead of fighting them, never played by their rules. Finally, one of the instructors spoke. "Carter, what do you call that strategy?" Jonah grinned. "Oh, that? That's just classic human problem-solving." The simulation room was dead silent. Jonah Carter had not just won, he had dismantled the entire premise of the exercise. Tresh still sat in his command pod, his claws clenched into fists. His mind replayed the battle, searching for some logical explanation, some reasonable justification for what had just happened. There wasn't one. The human didn't fight like a warrior. He didn't think like a strategist. He fought like someone who refused to accept reality as it was given to him. Tresh turned to glare at Jonah, who was currently leaning back in his chair, hands behind his head, looking like he had just finished a light workout instead of an entire simulated war. The room exploded with noise. "This is unacceptable!" That wasn't strategy. It was madness. No, it was cheating. The system was never designed for that. Jonah raised an eyebrow, looking amused. "Huh, you guys sure get worked up over losing." The instructors silenced the chaos with a single command. The lead instructor, an aged Vorkesh tactician, stood at the podium with his arms folded, his reptilian eyes locked onto Jonah. "Carter, explain yourself." Jonah sighed and sat forward. "Okay, which part? The minefield, the turret takeover, or the part where you guys forgot to secure your own power supply?" Tresh tensed. The instructor's scales rippled with irritation. "Your entire approach was outside the scope of the exercise." Jonah tilted his head. "Right, because the exercise assumed the enemy would play fair." The room stilled. "Explain." Jonah leaned back again, gesturing lazily. "Look, every one of your simulations assumes two things: that war is a clean, structured game with rules that both sides will follow, and that battles are won by perfect execution of pre-planned strategies. That's not how humans fight." Jonah stood up, stretching. "See, here's the problem. You all think of battle as a puzzle to be solved. You train for the ideal conditions where everyone follows the rules you expect. But humans? We break puzzles. We don't solve them. We take them apart and put them back together in ways you never imagined." He grinned, looking around the room. "How many of you actually thought I'd use your own turrets against you?" Silence. Jonah nodded. "Exactly. None of you did, because it was against the spirit of the exercise." He made air quotes with his fingers. "But in a real fight, the enemy doesn't care about your training protocols. They don't care if their strategy is fair. They care about winning." The instructors exchanged glances. Some looked thoughtful, others disturbed. Jonah turned to Tresh, smirking. "Hey, Tresh, if I had just followed your simulation rules, tried a traditional attack, played it safe, what would have happened?" Tresh narrowed his eyes. "You would have lost?" Jonah snapped his fingers. "Exactly." He turned back to the audience. "So tell me, why would I play a game I'm designed to lose?" The lead instructor exhaled slowly. "Your tactics, if they can even be called that, were reckless. They relied too heavily on exploitation of system vulnerabilities rather than structured combat planning." Jonah grinned. "You say that like it's a bad thing." The instructor's scales twitched in irritation. "Tell me, Carter, would you deploy these same methods in an actual war?" Jonah's expression changed. His usual casual amusement was replaced with something colder. "Yeah, because when it's real, there are no rules." The room fell silent. And for the first time, Tresh saw something unsettling in the human's eyes. Jonah folded his arms. "You all train for the best-case scenario. You assume an enemy will fight how you expect. But humans? We don't assume anything." His voice dropped slightly. "We fight like we're already losing." Tresh felt a chill run down his spine. "We fight like our entire species is on the line, every time, no exceptions." The instructors were silent. Jonah continued. "That's why you lost today. You fought like it was an exercise." I fought like it mattered. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. You all want to win battles. Humans want to end wars. The lead instructor finally spoke. Cadet Carter, return to your seat. Jonah nodded and dropped back into his chair, arms behind his head again. The instructors began discussing among themselves. The simulation results needed to be reviewed. Tresh exhaled slowly. He had been at the academy for 3 years. He had studied every known military strategy across 100 species. And yet, one human had walked in and unraveled everything in under an hour. Tresh hated to admit it. But for the first time in his life, he respected a human. The simulation was over. But the real battle was about to begin, because now, the instructors had one terrifying realization. If this is how humans fight, what happens when the rest of the galaxy finds out? The instructors had no answers. The alien cadets still sat in stunned silence. And Jonah Carter? He was grinning like a man who just found out the universe played by rules he didn't have to follow. Tresh still couldn't believe it. He had watched hundreds of battle simulations. He had studied centuries of documented war tactics. And yet, one human had just exposed a fatal flaw in their entire military doctrine. The worst part? The Galactic Command had been watching. Tresh and the other cadets had barely stepped out of the simulation room before they were immediately recalled to a classified briefing hall. The lead instructor's scales twitched with stress as he addressed the assembled cadets. Effective immediately, the results of today's simulation are classified. No discussion of Cadet Carter's tactics will leave this room. Tresh's mandibles clicked in confusion. Classified, but the instructor's gaze snapped to him. There is no but, Cadet. The demonstration you just witnessed presents a strategic anomaly. Tresh's claws curled. Anomaly? Jonah Carter had just won. And instead of acknowledging it, they were trying to hide it? Tresh felt his frustration rising. Sir, if the exercise exposed a flaw in our tactics, shouldn't we? This is beyond you, Cadet. The instructor's voice was sharp, final. The matter has already been escalated to Galactic Command. The galactic military hadn't expected much from human recruits. Sure, humans were durable. They could endure insane conditions and recover from horrific injuries. But strategy? Humans were unproven. Until now. Jonah Carter's simulation footage had already been transmitted to the Galactic War Council. And the response? Sheer panic. Begin transmission, Admiral Threxva. This human cadet ignored every established protocol of warfare. He disregarded conventional tactics entirely. Grand Strategist Vulek. And yet, he achieved an overwhelming victory, Tactician Dranier. The real concern is his unpredictability. He didn't just win, he dismantled the system. Admiral Threxva. If humans fight like this instinctively, we cannot predict their battlefield strategies. Grand Strategist Vulek. And what happens when they start fighting real wars? End transmission. Jonah Carter was summoned to the War Council's headquarters within hours. He walked into the hollowed chamber, casual as ever, while 4 of the highest-ranking strategists in the galaxy stared at him like he was an unsolvable problem. The lead strategist's mandibles twitched. "Cadet Carter, do you have any idea what you've done?" Jonah smirked. "Well, I'd say I just proved your military training doesn't account for humans." Silence. The strategist exhaled. "You have demonstrated a concerning talent for exploiting battlefield vulnerabilities." Jonah leaned forward. "Let me guess. You're not sure if you should promote me or launch me into a black hole?" The strategist's mandibles twitched. "Both options are under consideration." For centuries, the galactic military had operated under the assumption that war was predictable, that battles could be won by flawless execution of superior strategy. But Jonah Carter had changed that. Because humans didn't fight by the rules, they didn't aim for victory. They aimed to end the fight in the most effective, most ridiculous, and most chaotic way possible. Within days, the War Council issued a classified military directive. It had only one sentence: effective immediately, all strategic models must account for human unpredictability. The entire military had just been forced to rewrite their war doctrine because of one human cadet. Back in the academy dorms, Tresh finally confronted Jonah. He had spent years studying strategy. And yet, in one day, Jonah had redefined everything. Tresh's mandibles clicked as he sat across from the human. "I have to ask, do all humans fight like this?" Jonah smirked. "Oh, Tresh, buddy, I went easy on you guys." Tresh's stomach dropped. Jonah stretched. "Wait till you see what happens when we get serious."